Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I have a very special teaching I want to do today. We're also going to talk about an issue in the news of incredible significance. And this is something I want to talk to you about from scriptures about the issue of famine and what's happening right now in Ukraine and Russia and other parts of the world. And I'm going to answer some questions. But I want to get into this issue of the GOG and MAGOG war, what's happening right now in Russia, what significance does the war in Ukraine have? And I would just say right off the top, the Ukraine doesn't have a prophetic significance specifically as a nation. And the war that you're seeing right now between Russia and Ukraine could happen very quickly between China and Taiwan, Israel and Iran. There are hot spots all over the world. But Jesus said, when they asked him about the end times, this is Mark chapter 13, beginning in verse 8, it says, Jesus answering them began to say, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name saying, I am he, and will deceive many. But when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be troubled, for such things must happen, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines and troubles. These are the beginning of birth pangs. Now, this is significant because what we're seeing right now is an increase in earthquake and seismic activity, volcanic activity all around the world. Pestilences is mentioned there. We're at the end of a 2-year pandemic, hopefully the end of it, but we've had this incredible pandemic and famines, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, which is a major, major end time sign. And so the war in the Ukraine doesn't have specific significance prophetically, even though it's a part of the birth pangs. It's a part of nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, all those things. And so, by the way, the Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. The Ukraine is a major exporter of produce. And what's happening right now is going to already is disrupting the supply chain of wheat and barley from the Ukraine and from Russia. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But let me talk about the GOG and MAGOG war, because Russia is a major end times player. They have a major role in a war that is about to happen, I believe, very soon. The GOG and MAGOG war is what this is known as. Ezekiel 38, beginning with verse 1, says, Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against GOG of the land of MAGOG, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O GOG, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and lead you out. With all your army, horses, and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all its troops, the house of Togarmah from the far north, and all of its troops, many peoples are with you. So this is a prophecy that has not happened. Now, some people say this has happened before. It has never happened before. There has never been anything like this happen related to Israel with all these players involved. Now, these are ancient names. This is GOG, MAGOG, Meshech, Tubal, Persia. These are all ancient names. And so this is being written to a man. God says, prophesy against GOG and say to GOG, I am against you, GOG. And then he talks about he's the leader of Rosh, Russia, Meshech, and Tubal. Now, when I'm going to talk to you about who these nations are, and there's argument within the Christian community, and some people say, well, Rosh isn't Russia, and that, and this nation is this nation is this. Well, there's two things. One is I'm going to talk to you about what the people that I, respect, believe related to the identity of these nations. The other thing is you just look at reality. What's happening in the world right now is exactly what this scripture written 2,600 years ago from Ezekiel, he specifically geopolitically identifies the exact makeup of our world right now, beginning with Russia. And so GOG is the leader of Russia, and it's also talking about MAGOG. GOG is a person, MAGOG is a land. So let me show you a map here and talk about just the identity of these nations and where they are. Now, you'll notice, first of all, this is Israel right here. Israel's this tiny little nation. All these arrows on this map are pointing right here to Israel. Israel's about the size of New Jersey. If you put Israel in Lake Michigan, you would have room left over. So everybody is against this tiny little nation here. And you notice it says you're going to come from the far north, is what it said there in Ezekiel. Look here. If you come right here to Israel, to Jerusalem, by the way, when the Bible gives directions, it's always giving directions from Jerusalem. North means north of Jerusalem. East means east of Jerusalem. So here's Jerusalem in Israel right here. If you go directly to the far north, you hit Moscow right up here. This is Russia. Rosh is Russia. Russia is this massive country up here. Right now it takes up 1/8 of the landmass of the world. It's a massive country. So this is Rosh. Notice the Ukraine here. And some people are asking, is Ukraine a part of Rosh or Magog or whatever? It is possible, and there is an argument, a discussion about this in the theological community, and that is probably part of East Ukraine right here, because this is historically Russian more than West Ukraine over here. And so then you have Magog. Magog is made up of the Stan states. This is Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Afghanistan, possibly Afghanistan. This is Magog here, all the Stan nations. Persia is modern day Iran, okay? And so the Iranians are not Arabs, they're Persians. And so, by the way, the Persian people are a wonderful people. People in Iran, there's a huge revival going on in Iran. Their government is crazy. The Muslim leaders of Iran are radical Muslims, but the people are precious. And by the way, they would overthrow their government today if they could. They hate their own government. So the Persians are here. Then you have Gomer, Togarmah, Meshech, and Tubal, modern day Turkey here. Now Syria will be a part of the battle for sure. It says many peoples are with you. And so Syria, maybe Egypt and things like that. So then you have over here Libya, that mentions the nation of Libya. Libya, possibly parts of Algeria, and then Ethiopia, which is modern day Sudan here. Guess what two nations in Africa will not recognize Israel's nation? Libya and Ethiopia and modern day Sudan. And so exactly what the Bible said would happen has happened. And you say, well, what do these nations have in common? They're all allies of Russia. They're either directly controlled or heavily influenced by Vladimir Putin. They buy their arms from Russia here, and they all hate Israel. Russia is not Muslim, a little bit Muslim, not really Muslim. These are all Muslim nations. All these nations, Persia, Put, Ethiopia, all these are Muslim nations. They hate Israel. They would destroy Israel in a heartbeat if they could. So this is what they have in common, and they all exist today. Here's another interesting point. Ezekiel 38 talks about Sheba and Dedan, and it says Tarshish and her young lions. Now, Dr. Mark Hitchcock believes that Tarshish was a Phoenician outpost there in Spain, just talking about the West. It says that Saudi Arabia here, the Arabian Peninsula here, along with the West, some people from the West, will challenge when the GOG and MAGOG alliance begins to attack Israel. They're going to be challenged by the Saudi Arabia, this peninsula here, and also from the West. Here's the interesting thing. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Oman, all these countries here, these are pro-Western countries. They do not align. In fact, Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other. And so it's interesting that exactly what the Bible said would happen in the end is happening right now. Because Saudi Arabia is very pro-American, has been historically. The UAE, Qatar, these kind of nations, they're making the Abraham Accords with Israel. So all of these nations here are aligned with Russia, hate Israel. These nations here are pro-Western and either have agreements with Israel through the Abraham Accords, or they have a friendly relationship with the West. So exactly the way the world is supposed to happen is the way it's happening right now. And to all the people who would argue that Rosh, is not Russia or whatever, look at what's happening in the world right now. Now, there's a leader right now named Vladimir Putin. I believe if this is a current prophecy, I believe he's Gog. I believe that he is revealing himself as being Gog. God says, I'm against you, Gog. And all these nations that you control, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw, and the hook in the jaw was an animal hook that when an animal wouldn't do what the owner wanted, they would put, like a donkey, they'd put a hook in his mouth and drag him around. And God says, I'm going to tell you something, Gog. You're not the decision maker here. I'm going to use you for my own purposes. I'm going to put a hook in your jaw and drag you down to the mountains of Israel, and I will destroy you there. That's how this ends, by the way, is God personally destroys Gog and all of the forces that come with him. So why are they attacking Israel? This is an important question. Why would all these nations be attacking Israel? Well, this is what Ezekiel 38 says. It says, prepare yourself and be ready, you and all your companies that are gathered about you, and be a guard for them. After many days you will be visited. In the latter years you will come into the land of those brought back from the sword and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell safely. You will ascend, coming like a storm, covering the land like a cloud, you and all your troops and many peoples with you. Thus says the Lord God, on that day it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind, and you will make an evil plan. You will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Here it is, to take plunder and to take booty, to stretch out your hand against waste places that are again inhabited, and against a people gathered from the nations who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. So there's three reasons that are given for the attack. The first is to take booty and plunder. In other words, to come and get what is valuable in Israel for yourself. The second is to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited. They want the land back. That's what that means. This land that is inhabited by the Jews, you want to come and take that land back. The third reason is to stretch out your hand against a people gathered from the nations, Israel, on the mountains of Israel. This is Israel. They want to kill the Jews, they want to get the land back, and they want to take what's valuable. Well, there's two groups of people invading. There's GOG and those with him, the non-Muslims, the Russians, and then there are the Muslims from the other nations. Okay, so you have the Muslims, then you have the Russians. Well, they have completely different motives. So Russia, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, why would Russia invade Israel? What does Israel have that's so valuable that Russia would invade them? I would have just said to you, unless you like swimming in the Dead Sea, I don't know why anyone in the world would attack Israel to get what they had. Well, that was before Israel discovered 32 trillion cubic feet of natural gas off of their shore in the Mediterranean in the last 7 or 8 years. 32 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Now you remember that Europe buys about a third of their natural gas and a lot of their oil from Russia. And they hate it. The Europeans hate buying their oil and natural gas from Russia because Vladimir Putin manipulates them constantly that he's going to shut their gas off unless they do this or that. So they're trying to get away from him. And because of the invasion of Ukraine, there was a Nord Stream 2 pipeline being built from Russia to Germany. They shut that off. The Russians are going to lose tremendous amounts of natural gas business in oil business because of this invasion of the Ukraine. By the way, until last week, the United States of America, were buying 100,000 barrels of oil a day from Russia. We've shut off our Keystone Pipeline. We've shut off all this other exploration of oil and natural gas. And now the president called Saudi Arabia, and I believe it was the UAE, to ask them to sell us more oil, and they wouldn't return our phone calls. This is showing you the lack of respect the world has for America right now. And so Russia's losing their gas business. They're losing some of their oil business. The world is boycotting them. And at the same time, Israel is building the East Med pipeline through Cyprus and Greece to the European continent that's supposed to be finished in 2025. And Israel will become the replacement for Russia to sell billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of natural gas to the European continent. And by the way, Israel's already selling their natural gas to Egypt, to Jordan, and marketing it to other Middle Eastern countries, which is also cutting into the Russian business. And so Russia's furious at Israel right now because Israel denounced the invasion of the Ukraine. The day after they denounced the invasion of the Ukraine, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations said that they no longer recognize the Golan Heights as belonging to Israel, which is extremely significant because the Golan Heights is on the Syrian border. The Russians are there, the Iranians are there, the Syrians are there. All of them that are part of this GOG, MAGOG, they're sitting right there on the northern border of Israel, and the Golan Heights gives whoever has the Golan Heights has a strategic advantage because Israel sits below the Golan Heights. They use it as a place to bomb Israel. That's what they did in 1967, the last time the Syrians controlled the Golan Heights. So now the Russians are essentially saying, if the Syrians want to take over the Golan Heights, good, we'll support them. They can have it. And there's no way Israel's going to give that up. And so you have 32 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. If Vladimir Putin could come and invade Israel and take that gas, he would control the gas market for that part of the world. In other words, he wouldn't be losing business, he would be gaining business, and he would be gaining control, and that's what he wants. And by the way, the Russians have a permanent military base in Syria and a permanent naval base in Syria. Bashar al-Assad, who's the president of Syria, is a puppet. He's a very weak leader. He would have been deposed many years ago if it were not for the Russians. And Vladimir Putin controls him because Russians can do anything they want in Syria as long as Bashar al-Assad is there. And so this is the Russians have a completely different motivation for invading Israel. The Muslims have another motivation, and that is they want to kill every last Jew in Israel. Many of the Muslims say this: we're not going to be satisfied until the last Jew drowns in the Mediterranean Sea, and they mean it. They want to kill the Jews, and they want to take the land back and Jerusalem. They want Jerusalem as their valued prize. The leader of Turkey, Erdogan. You have the leaders of Iran. Many of the Jewish leaders, obviously the Palestinians, they dream of the day when they drive the Jews from the land and they take back their cherished prize of Jerusalem and also the Temple Mount. Now, eschatology is what I'm training you in right now, what I'm teaching right now. Eschatology is a study of the end times. So the Bible is full. About a third of the Bible is prophecy. Most of it's end time prophecy. So the Bible's full of eschatology. Well, so is Islam. Islam is the religion. Muslims are the people who practice Islam. So the Islamic faith, they have their own eschatology. They also believe in the end of the world. And they also believe Jesus is returning, by the way. And so let me talk about Iran, because Iran is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran is not controlled by political leaders, it's controlled by religious leaders. They have political leaders, but they're under the authority of the religious leaders of Iran. And so the leaders of Iran, the mullahs and the ayatollah, they believe that Allah, this is their eschatology, they believe that Allah has called them to destroy the Jews, to destroy Israel as a nation. And when they do that, that the hidden imam, who is their Messiah, will return with Jesus, and Jesus will then tell the world that he is a Muslim, and Jesus will call on the world to convert to Islam. That's their eschatology. So they believe, you have to understand, they believe that they have been called by Allah to destroy Israel. This is their call. Now, and they'll say to people, oh, we're not developing nuclear weapons to having arms. Baloney. And let me show you this. The hook in the jaw, God says, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw and drag you down. Different people have different opinions on what the hook in the jaw is. Here's my opinion. The Iranians have been enriching uranium for years, but it's believed that they now have enough enriched uranium to build a nuclear bomb. Benny Gantz, who's the defense minister of Israel, said last summer, I believe it was in August, maybe September, he said that the Iranians were 8 weeks away from having enough nuclear material to build one nuclear weapon, and it would only take 2 or 3 months after that to have enough for a second nuclear weapon. So it is believed right now that Iran has enough nuclear material for at least one bomb. Well, the second thing is they haven't had a delivery mechanism for that bomb until now. And now they have developed a missile, and I'll show you a picture of this missile here. This is the missile that the Iranians now have this missile, which has enough range on it to reach the nation of Israel, Jerusalem. And if you'll notice this inscription on the missile here to the left side of the missile, that Arabic inscription, this missile is named after a war where the Muslims defeated the Jews. In other words, they have built now a missile that can reach Israel, and they put Israel's name on it. So this is a very, very bad thing. Now, Israel put $5 billion in their budget this year to bomb Iran. They have been practicing military drills, massive military drills, practicing bombing Iran. They've told the Russians, if the Iranians don't stop enriching uranium, we're going to bomb them. They've told the United States, if they don't stop enriching uranium, we're going to bomb them. They have announced publicly, put it in their budget, they're practicing, they're going to bomb Iran. Iran is now enriching uranium. And by the way, in the talks in Vienna that have been happening, everybody walked away from the table this week in Vienna, or last week in Vienna, and the reason they walked away is because Iran said, okay, if we make this deal with you concerning our nuclear program, you can't sanction our dealings with Russia. We want open dealings with Russia. Well, guess who's helping them build their bombs and their nuclear program. Russia, there are Russians all through the nuclear installations there in Iran. They've been partners for many years. And so, and by the way, the deal that was on the table, that the Americans and the Russians, everybody were trying to talk Iran into signing this deal, it didn't take away Iran's nuclear materials, their enriched uranium. It didn't take away their centrifuges, and we were having to pay them billions and billions and billions of dollars just to make any deal with us. That's like having to tie a pork chop around your neck to get the dog to play with you. I mean, that's the most pathetic thing in the entire world. How pathetically weak are we that we're going to sit there and let this rabidly anti-Israel nation get a nuclear weapon? They have the fuel, they have the delivery mechanism. They have been saying for many years publicly, we will destroy the nation of Israel, very publicly. Their leaders, their top leaders have said constantly that we're the big Satan and Israel's the little Satan. And so they have said it, they're going to do it. Israel has said this, by any cost, we will never allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon, by any cost. Whatever happens. See, the world can sit and talk all they want to, but Israel's 700 miles away from Iran. Iran has a delivery mechanism, and it's believed they have right now, or maybe a few days or a few weeks away from having the nuclear fuel they need for that bomb. As soon as they get a bomb, they're going to shoot it at Israel. They already have Israel's name on the bomb. And so, in my opinion, Israel will bomb Iran. I put this in my book, Tipping Point, a year and a half ago when it came out, that I believe that Israel must bomb Iran. Iran is an existential threat to the nation of Israel. I believe when that happens, it will start World War III. It will start the GOG and MAGOG war, because Russia has threatened constantly, if the United States and or Israel acts against Iran, that Russia will step in and we'll have them to answer for it. So Vladimir Putin has already proven in the last few weeks he's a caged animal. I mean, first of all, he's an evil man. He's bombing nursing homes. He's bombing the kindergartens. I mean, the little school areas. He bombed a mosque last week and killed everybody in it that was hiding in the mosque. I mean, this guy's an animal. No reason whatsoever to attack a peaceful, sovereign nation, Ukraine. But he has invented that all these neo-Nazis and all these people, and the leader of the Ukraine is a Jew. And he's trying to convince the Russian people that they're neo-Nazis and all these Nazis that are running the Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. He invented this war because he's still grieving the fact that the Soviet Union fell. He was in the KGB. He was an agent for the KGB, and still humiliated over the fact that he calls it the most tragic incident in the world that happened in the 20th century was the fall of the Soviet Union. So he's still grieving over that. He wants to reassemble that. I believe he wants to take over parts of Europe. He's on the border of Poland right now, bombing military bases there in Ukraine, just on the border of Poland there, which is a NATO nation. So this is a dangerous man. Again, if this is a current prophecy, I believe that he is GOG. I believe that Vladimir Putin is GOG. He's acting exactly like GOG will act, and he's exactly in the place where GOG will be scripturally, and he has great influence and control over all the nations listed there in Ezekiel 38. And so how does the war end? The war ends very tragically. God brings all this is again in Ezekiel 38. I'm not going to read it, but all the nations that attack Israel, there's an earthquake, there's hellfire, brimstone. Israel doesn't have to fire a bullet. God destroys them himself. And then there's the question of, when does this happen? Okay, when does this GOG and MAGOG coalition, when do they attack Israel? Well, there are four things that have to happen. According to Ezekiel 38, there are four requirements that have to be in place before the GOG and MAGOG coalition can attack Israel. First of all, Israel must be restored back to their land after it had long been desolate. Well, in AD 70, the Roman general Titus invaded Israel. 1.1 million Jews were killed. He destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the Temple Mount, took the Jews back, led them captive, the living Jews. He took them captive back to Rome. Then they were scattered around the world. From AD 70 until 1948, Israel had been desolate, and now they're back as a nation. So you can check that box. Number two, Israel must have come back to the land for many nations. In AD 70, in 500 BC, the first time they were dispossessed, they went to Babylon, and they came back from Babylon 70 years later. That was one nation. But in AD 70, they went to Rome, then they've been scattered around the nations. And so since 1948, They've been coming back from all over the nations. By the way, they're coming back from the Ukraine right now. They've come back from Russia. They've come back from Europe. All over the world, the Jews have come back. You can check that box. Number 3, they must be dwelling securely. Let me come back to that one. Number 4, they must be prosperous. The Israelis are filthy rich. Their tech sector is white hot. They have 32 trillion cubic feet of natural gas that they've just discovered. They export, huge exporter of agricultural produce. The Dead Sea has 1 billion tons of chemicals in it, so on and so forth. The Israelis are very, very, very prosperous. Let me go back to they must be dwelling securely, because this is where there is some disagreement among theologians as to, are the Jews dwelling securely? Well, they're by far the most powerful nation in that area of the world, by far. They're at peace with Egypt. They're at peace with Jordan. But let me quote a Jew here. Many of you will listen to Amir Safadi. He's a Jew. He lives in Israel. And this is what he said. This is what I heard him say. And that is, they have never had it as good as they have right now. They're powerful. They're dwelling securely. They have, of course, Hamas and Hezbollah and that kind of stuff. But within Israel, the Jewish people, they're dwelling securely without bars and gates, without walls. They do have a big wall that, between them and Ramallah and them and the West Bank. Inside of Israel, I was there in 2017. Gorgeous, gorgeous. You drive through the country of Israel. There aren't walls. There aren't bars and gates. Very, very secure. I believe that this could happen anytime. I personally believe this will happen before the rapture or around the time of the rapture. And so, because I believe this war will set up the agreement, the confirmation of a covenant between Israel and the Antichrist. That's my personal opinion. It says it's going to take 7 months to bury the dead and 7 years to clean up the debris. And so that would be during the tribulation period of time. I believe it can happen anytime. And I believe what we're seeing right now in the Ukraine is GOG. If this is a current prophecy, I believe that Vladimir Putin is GOG. If it's going to happen years in the future, well, GOG could be someone else, and someone else would arise. But I believe the GOG and MAGOG war is what you're seeing happening right now. Let me go into the news and talk about famine. Now, I want to read just several articles here. This is an article from Prophecy Newswatch, and it says, the biggest global food crisis of our generation is coming. And let me read you just a little bit of this because it's shocking. This is March 10th. Of this year, Michael Snyder. By the end of 2022, we're going to witness very serious shortages of food in many parts of the globe. In fact, World Bank President David Malpass is openly admitting that we are now facing, quote, a huge supply shock, close quote, as a result of the war in Ukraine. Of course, we were already moving into a global food crisis even before the war erupted. According to the United Nations, world food prices in February 2022 were 20.7% higher than they were in February of 2021. Fertilizer prices have gone absolutely nuts. Crop production is down all over the planet due to crazy weather patterns, and supply chain problems caused by the pandemic continue to create ongoing headaches. But now that Russia has invaded Ukraine, that is going to push this rapidly growing global food crisis to a level. That none of us have ever seen before. And then he goes on, I'm skipping down now. It says, right now the global price of food is the highest it has ever been. And Russia and Ukraine normally account for nearly a third of the world's wheat and barley exports. Nearly a third. See, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. Ukraine and Russia are massive exporters of wheat and barley. And of course now the Ukraine, they don't believe that the farmers in Ukraine will be able to plant a crop this spring. we'll be able to harvest it next fall. That's when real trouble begins. Of course, with Russia, they're sanctioned. We're sanctioning them and everything that they have. They can export to certain countries, but they can't export to the world the way they have been. Let me keep reading here. Things are going to be very challenging in Europe as well, because Ukraine normally provides almost 60% of the corn that Europe uses. Ukraine supplies the EU with just under 60% of its corn and nearly half of a key component in the grains needed to feed livestock. Earlier today, I was stunned to learn that it is being projected that China's winter wheat crop could be the worst in history. This is what China's saying. The conditions of China's winter wheat crop could be the worst in history, the agriculture minister said on Saturday, raising concerns about grain supplies in the world's biggest wheat consumer. The USDA is reporting that a whopping 71% of all winter wheat in the United States has been affected by drought. Let me tell you, this is the perfect storm of a food supply shortage that we're going to be witnessing. Already happening because of the pandemic. I went to a place yesterday to eat lunch and I ordered some iced tea to go, and the guy handed me a cup and said, we don't have any covers for these cups, lids for these cups, and we have no idea when we're going to get them. And so the supply chain issue has affected everybody. Well, now it has already affected the global food supply because of the pandemic. Now you have the Ukraine and Russia, the worst ever food crop in China. China can't feed their own people. They have to import food from all over the world, including the United States, to feed their own people. Now they have their worst crop ever. 71% of the winter wheat crop in America has been affected by the drought. I mean, this is incredible. And I'm going to read you some scriptures here in just a minute. But this is another article in the Jerusalem Post. World faces food crisis due to Ukraine war, Russian billionaire Melnichenko says. A global food crisis looms unless the war in Ukraine is stopped, because fertilizer prices are soaring so fast that many farmers can no longer afford soil nutrients, Russian fertilizer and coal billionaire Andrei Melnichenko said on Monday. And so, again, this is someone who is a Russian who owns part of the fertilizer business there saying this. One more article here, and this is from Prophecy News Watch. Russia to ban fertilizer exports as China warns U.S. against retaliation. Let me read you a little part of this article here, and then I want to talk about it. Russia's war on Ukraine is continuing to boost food prices while the U.S. and European countries are engaged in economic warfare against Moscow. It appears Russia's turn to strike back has emerged. On Thursday, Russian Minister of Industry and Trade Denis Montarov said Russia decided to suspend fertilizer exports. This comes when global food prices are at record highs and European fertilizer makers are struggling to produce nutrients ahead of the spring growing season, including increasing global food inflation risk. President Vladimir Putin said the fertilizer export ban was a move to ensure stable domestic food prices. This is another sign of growing protectionism worldwide as countries grapple with soaring food prices. Putin said fertilizer markets are deteriorating, making food a lot more expensive. And so if things weren't as bad, I think 13% of the world's fertilizer comes from Russia. So they're going to sell it to the friendly nations that are friendly with them, but the rest of the world they're not. Farmers, the farmers, thank God for farmers. Thank God for the people that raise the food that we eat. But farmers can't grow as much as they grow without being able to put nutrients into the soil. These fertilizers are extremely important. So now you have bad growing conditions. In China, in the United States, you have the war in Ukraine, which is affecting the Ukraine, and also Russia. And now you're having Russia holding back on its fertilizer exports, which is again going to affect many crops around the world and their ability to grow crops. This is the United Nations now, just a little article here from the United Nations I want to mention before I read these scriptures. Famine knocking at the door of 41 million worldwide. That was last year in 2021. This has grown significantly. Lebanon right now is rationing flour because they get their flour, much of their flour, from the Ukraine. Syria, I just read yesterday that Syria is rationing their food supply there because, again, they get a lot of their food from the Ukraine and Russia and things like that. So this is already affecting nations in the world that are on the verge of famine. But I want to read you a couple of scriptures. This is a scripture that I read you at the beginning of my message. And Jesus said, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. Do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines. These are the beginning of birth pangs. Now, famines is a birth pang of the end times. In other words, it's something that as famine gets worse, it's like a woman giving birth to a child. It gets worse and worse and worse. And so we've seen famines around the world for the last 70 so years since Israel became a nation. Now you're seeing the contractions getting closer together and a lot harder, that the world is about to give birth, that Jesus is about to come. Here's Revelation 6. And I want to show, so famine is a birth pang on this side, but famine is a major feature of the tribulation on the other side. In other words, what we're seeing right now is setting up the world for the tribulation. This is Revelation 6. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hands. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quarter of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." When he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider was named Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with the sword, with famine, with pestilence, and by wild beasts. So this is the Revelation 6. These are the sealed judgments which begin the tribulation. This is when the tribulation begins. So we have 2 horses here. We have the black horse and we have the pale horse. The black horse is released, and world food supply becomes so severe that it takes a denarius, which is a day's wage. It was what the average worker made in one day. Okay, it took a denarius to buy a quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley. Now the reason it says that is because barley is not as quality as wheat, and it takes 3 times more barley to make up what 1 part of wheat would do. So a whole day's wage to buy enough food to eat for you and your family if you're an average worker. Okay, that's the black horse. Bad news. It says don't harm the oil and the wine. A lot of people have different interpretations of that. My interpretation of that is just simply the luxury items are everywhere. I mean, people have been raptured, people have been dead. If you want oil, this is olive oil, by the way, not petroleum. If you need olive oil or wine, you can have all you want. If you want something to eat, to live on, there's not very much around. That's just my personal interpretation of it. Then the pale horse comes in, and 2 billion people die. There are about 8 billion people. in the world right now. 2 billion people die, and many of them die by famine. And so famine is a birth pain, but famine is also a part of the judgment of the tribulation. What I believe we're seeing right now is the world situation exactly paralleling what the scripture said would happen as a birth pain and as a judgment. Imagine when the rapture happens and 1 billion people leave, it even gets worse. Even though there are fewer people to feed, all the judgments begin to happen on the earth. And the food supply, people being killed, war, the rider on the red horse, by the way, peace is taken from the earth. You just think there's wars right now. You wail the tribulation, peace is taken from the earth. So I want to say all of this today to say we're living in very significant times. What does it mean? It means Jesus Christ is coming. Vladimir Putin is not in control. The Iranians are not in control. The United Nations is not in control. The United States is not in control. Jesus Christ is in control. What I've read you today was written 2,600 years ago by the prophet Ezekiel, and it's absolutely exactly what he said would happen in the last days. And so we're looking at a world where the birth pangs are announcing. Jesus said, when you see these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your head, your redemption draws near. Next week we have Rabbi Jason Sobel, who's going to be joining me. Very, very interesting person, knowledgeable person, brilliant. He's a friend of mine, brilliant guy. He's going to be joining us next week, but I'm going to do the questions and answers. Next time I'm up with a normal program, I'll do the Q&A. God bless you. Thank you for joining me today. I'll see you next time.